Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood.
Good morning, and thank you for tuning in to Speak Up. Speak Up is a radio talk show providing a platform for diverse perspectives, discussing the political, social, and economic issues affecting our community. Today, I am joined by my co-host, Shaun Taylor, Dr. Marwin Spiller, and Miss Jamila K. Wilson. Last month was Black History Month, and now we are in the month of March, and we have had an eventful month so far. We have a number of things to discuss as it regards to race relations. So I'm going to yield to Dr. Spiller, and he is going to get the discussion started.
Thank you. March was a difficult month with regard to race relations in America. There were a number of incidents that were in many ways unprecedented. We had the Justice Report, we had the Ferguson protests, we had the death of another young black male in Madison, Wisconsin. We had the Oklahoma State incident where a white fraternity were videotaped chatting racist remarks. We had former Mayor Giuliani questioning the president's love of country. And most recently, we saw the hanging of an African-American male in Mississippi. Certainly, we don't know the details of that, that's still circumstantial, but one thing we do know that the hanging conjures up images of lynchings, of Jim Crow South that for many African Americans it's a troubling reality. So we can't talk about all these issues, but we do want to touch on how these issues in concert speak to the state of race relations in America today. And so I want to open up this conversation with the question of how would you explain the realities of race relations today? You know, why are we seeing all these incidents now at this moment in America's history when there's so many things that we can celebrate or should be celebrating? Why are we seeing these troubling problems that seem to linger? And so I'll throw that out to the floor. Anyone?
Don't everybody speak at
not
once.
everybody.
No, that's right.
Miss Wilson, I nominate Miss Wilson.
You know, honestly, I'm dumbfounded. Could very well be speechless at this point. I don't know or understand why we are experiencing this level of aggression towards blackness. But I will refer back to my solace, my foundation, which is the teachings of Dr. Du Bois, that it is quite prophetic that we are at a point where we must make very definitive decisions as to where and how we're seeking to move this country, not just as it relates to race, but as it relates to issues of economics, working class people, the state of our political economy. And black people have always been, to a certain degree, in my perspective, the sort of canary in the mine, a foreshadowing of what is to come. And so it is very important that we pay attention to these issues and not just sweep them under the rug as if these are isolated, because they're not, and really look at it within the larger context of what's going on in the dawn or the beginning of the 21st century.
Okay.
And you know, we always hear the saying, if you're not careful, history will repeat itself.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand what happened in the past, you won't know how to behave or conduct yourself in the future. And I think that is literally what we have going on here. We have so many people, especially our young people, who aren't engaged. They, don't have the level of respect. They aren't taking the time out to really learn about the things that went on in the past. So therefore, the level of consciousness that we have now is very low as it relates to race relations. And I won't say nobody, I'll say it's perceived that no one is really thinking about how to improve these conditions. We're just kind of allowing these things to happen, and it's kind of like, you wake up every day, you go through the motions, whatever happens within your day, you deal with it. And instead of waking up every day, setting a plan for your life, choosing your course and your direction. We're just allowing the demise, of our people.
Okay. But to your point, I mean, one of the conversations we had offline was with regard to the incident with the Oklahoma State and the fraternity, and the racist chant. And part of that conversation brought up an old conversation of our use of the N-word. And I know that we are split in terms of the salience of that story. Because on the one hand, we can argue that there are a lot of young people who see that video and say, hey, what's the problem? That doesn't represent everybody. I use the N-word all the time. My friends use the N-word. And so it's really, I think someone said, it's a distraction from real issues. Shaun, I mean, how do you explain the fact that, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Selma? We know that there are a record number of African Americans that are going to college, which should be progress. But at the same time, we have white fraternities chanting disparaging words, lyrics about black people. How do you explain that? Is that just two Americas living, side by side, or is one the real America? How do you explain that?
Well, I mean, I think we have to be careful with the labels when we're talking about real America or two Americas. I mean, whether it's the chant, the racist chants, or whether it's, questioning President Obama's patriotism or love of country or any of these negative racial stories, they're just the manifestation of a mentality. It's just like, obviously, if you saw the video of those kids chanting what they were chanting, it's not like that was the first time. Or I would assume that wasn't the first time. It was almost like a war cry, so to speak. So that's a mentality that they've been cultivating for some time now. And then when you speak about celebrating the 50th anniversary of Selma and the perceived progress of African Americans and other minorities in America, everybody's not celebrating that. Some people are celebrating that, but there's dark forces, so to speak, that, are railing against that. They profit off of division, whether they profit, just for their own diabolical satisfaction or monetarily speaking. Everyone, they don't want there to be a unification. They don't want to celebrate progress. So, I mean, none of these stories are new.
Right.
But this is what the media shows. And not to say that it's not what happens, but they could choose to show different things. Right. But that's not what sells. With Ferguson, 95% of the protesters were peaceful. But is that what they showed?
Right.
You get Don Lemon talking about, yeah, of course it smells like marijuana out here. Why? Why of course? Or obviously. Why does he say obviously it smells like marijuana?
Right.
Because it's a bunch of, black people that are exercising their rights.
Right.
So.
But should we be surprised? I mean, should we be surprised by any of this right now? Or is this just par for the core? Because one of the conversations, has America changed? Or is it the same old America? And this is just a bubbling up of things that have existed underneath the surface for a long time, or, have America changed?
I would say it's definitely the latter, the bubbling up that has always existed, because I would like to challenge this ideal of progress and looking at it from a chronological perspective, that if we say we began, let's say we started 1619 with slavery in America, and we'll be coming up upon the 400th anniversary of that in 2019. So 400 years. From 1619 to 1865, we had legalized enslavement, the chattel slavery, where black bodies were seen as property. And then from 1865 to about 1877, about 12 years of progress, Reconstruction. And after that, a counter-revolutionary attack against blackness from 1877, we'll say, to about 1965, 68 if we want to be nice. From 1968 until 2014, 15, and even there we can question the level of progress. We're looking at maybe about 40 to 50 years. And in that 40 to 50 years, we have the highest rate of incarceration. We have double-digit unemployment. And we have the killing of black men and women by the state where there are some that report every 28 hours a black person is killed by police or a vigilante, and more so now by police. So I'm questioning where this progress is, and who has benefited from this progress, because when we begin to look at the numbers and we look at it from a larger perspective, we are still in what some could consider, as the Urban League has defined, a crisis.
You agree there's no progress?
I don't think Jamila was saying there was no progress. I think she was challenging the
notion
level
of progress.
Yeah,
notion of
I'd like to
progress.
know what percentage of progress we're at so we can start
Okay,
defining.
well, maybe she wasn't.
No progress.
But you know, at this point, I feel like we should be discussing more. What are we going to do about it? Okay, so we know that these things exist. We know that, as Jamila laid out so beautifully, her timeline from slavery up until now, that there has been very little progress. But, I would like to start looking at what are we going to do about it as people in our generation, and let this be a call to, the community. Let this be a call to, whoever is out in the airwaves who will hear this. What are we going to do about it? What, are we going to continue to let this happen and then continue to have discussions about it?
Right.
Or are we going to start putting together some kind of, plan so that we can, start minimizing
Right.
some of this?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly the issue at hand. What do we do? And I think, at least from my perspective, it's hard to get to what do we do until we address the issue of what's a problem, what's not a problem. In terms of our course of action would certainly reflect what we perceive to be a problem, and I don't think we're clear as a community
I agree.
on what the problem is. And so in terms of what do we do, it seems like we have some steps
I
to
would
get
say I don't think a fraternity chanting the N word with the ER on the end is the issue. I'm
Right.
not saying it's not an issue,
Right.
but it's not the issue, because clearly this is something that they were taught to say.
Right.
Clearly there's a level of ignorance. These, just because you're a college frat boy doesn't mean that you have the most common sense,
Right.
in the world. So I think there is a gross level of ignorance. And, it's not to say that all of those boys are racist
Right.
or, they hate black people. They made a stupid decision, at a stupid time. Maybe they felt pressure. Maybe it was peer pressure.
Right.
So, I mean, you just never know.
Right.
I'm sorry, just to jump in. I mean, we also have to look at the totality of the subject too, because there were the coach of that college, the football coach, came out and condemned the statements, and he stood in solidarity with some of the players at a march or some kind of rally the next day, condemning those statements. So that's progress, because it's not like people just accepted it laying down and said that's
Right.
fine and this is status quo. So there's progress that people responded against it. Barack Obama is progress.
Right.
Dr. Marwin Spiller is progress. Us sitting here right now is progress. And I agree with Jamila that, there can be a lot more work. There's a lot more work to be done. But like the saying goes, progress is a slow process. And I think we have to get people to, once again, raise their consciousness. We have to all raise our consciousness to contribute to this process. And we have to get rid of this complacency or this sense of entitlement to the dream to say, okay, well, I own a house, so now I've made it. I've accomplished the American dream. No, you have to keep striving for more. You have to keep challenging yourself and pushing towards greatness for yourself and for the generations that come after you. Right. And as long as we're you and I have talked about this before, you have people with smartphones, you can access just millions and probably billions of pages of information,
Right.
but you have people watching YouTube videos of cats playing with string or people beating each other up. So it's like, where's your attention?
Right.
You know what I mean? And if you can get people to focus and be intentional, like Chama was saying, with a plan every day
Right.
to progress, the progress is gonna move faster. But as long as people are distracted and they're, looking down and not looking up, then, it's gonna be stagnant.
Yeah, and I think that sort of ties into my sentiment about when I heard the story about the college fraternity and their chance. So for me, what I took from that story was that if we as a community continue to embrace the N-word, I mean, it speaks to how we, in my opinion, think about ourselves. And so certainly there's a lot of information that we can tap. But then the question becomes, if we think of ourselves in such low, ignorant ways, then why would we tap that information? If we call ourselves that, if we promote that amongst our communities, there's a lot of things that we can't control. We can't impact structural, political, economic change. But
Why
there are
can't
things.
we?
I mean, we can't directly impact that. Certainly, we can do that through the vote. We can do that through our collective action. But there are things that we have direct control that we can change right now. And from my perspective, is one of those things that if we could, as so long as we put language out there that denigrate ourselves, then what prevents others from doing so?
Well, I mean, listen, the N word has been used by people, particularly in this country, for centuries. And it was being used during the time when we were enslaved, and yet there were black folks who felt a level of consciousness and awareness to actively participate in our emancipation. Let's be clear, we were not freed. We freed ourselves. And I know, sometimes people get a little confused about that. But we can't be distracted constantly by the way we choose to identify ourselves, or how we want to call ourselves. That for me begins to deal in areas of identity politics, which can be super subjective, and we can go days upon days about this issue. And we do need to begin to address the issues, the systemic issues that challenge our progress, the opportunities for progress. I do want to go back, and not to beat a dead horse, but even during enslavement, you had free people of color. You had people who owned land and property and other resources. So this ideal of black people having access is not anything new. It has always existed. It's about the masses. How do we seek to address the issues of the masses? The masses of black people are the ones that are struggling and are in crisis. We've always had an elite or creme de la creme of blackness. That's not anything new. So what we do need to begin to challenge, and what we do need to begin to focus upon, is the systemic challenges that affect not just black folks but all people. Dr. Du Bois always said that if we were to experience social democracy in this country, it will be through black leadership.
Yeah, but just to your point, Du Bois died very frustrated with his talented.
I don't know, but no. Dr. Du Bois later addressed that he had to address the ideal of the talented 10th to the guiding 100th in the 1940s because people misunderstood what he meant. Talented 10th is a program. When we read the actual words of Dr. Du Bois, he's talking about an educational program. He's not talking about an echelon of people.
But his talented 10th did not reach back and pull up the masses
because they misunderstood. They misunderstood. But we won't do that.
Good morning. You are listening to Speak Up. Speak Up is a radio talk show providing a platform for diverse perspectives discussing political, social, and economic issues affecting our community. Right now, I have my co-host, Shaun Taylor, Dr. Marwin Spiller, and Jamila K. Wilson, and we are currently discussing the N-word.
Yes, and I think that as if we are we talking about class or are we talking about race? And I
It's
think
both. Go ahead.
and I think that certainly that's a part of it, because I mean, when you're talking about Du Bois' talent attempt, I mean that was a class issue. You know, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, well, I kind of want to go back
Okay, go back.
to where you were saying, you know, if we, along the lines of talking about ourselves in
Right.
derogatory ways and different
Right.
things like that. So I do agree that, you know, what you speak eventually becomes your reality. But
Mhm.
I will say, not that I'm advocating for anybody to go out using the N word, but I will say that as black people, we have the tendency to turn lemons into lemonade. And I think we do that with a lot of things that have been painful to us
Mhm.
throughout our history. We have a habit of taking something negative and putting a spin on it so that we can pretty much take that and use it as something that we feel is more positive. Now, of course, this will be like a never ending debate, the
Mhm.
N word, whether it should be used. People are probably always going to use it, it's never going to be banned. And then there will be people who will always be against the word. However, I'm not offended by the N word that ends in A in a certain context. I don't want that. I don't want to be referred to as that. But if I
Right.
heard two guys talking to each other in a, you know, pleasant manner, it wouldn't throw me off. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I think it's just one of those things where we took something that was negative and we turned it into what we felt like was
Mhm.
positive.
Right, right, and I get that argument, and I just wonder whether or not we can ever deal with the biases that exist in our society that are often informed by stereotypes, and we have to get to the point where we're challenging those stereotypes instead of embracing them, instead of reclaiming it. Because in my perspective, until we get power, then we not changing, making no lemonade. Because we the only one think that. The folks with power are the ones who have who we have to change their minds and
I
how they
understand
think
what
about
you're
us.
saying.
And so, and perhaps you go
I just want to say this. Like, I appreciate Kendrick Lamar's new album, To Pimp a Butterfly, where and his cover art is quite extraordinary, where you have all of these black men that could easily be misidentified as NIGGAs, standing on the White House lawn on top of what appears to be a court justice, a Supreme Court justice or a officer of the court who's dead. Now, I'm not quite sure what he's saying here, but what I'm interpreting from this is you think I'm that. You think I'm that NIGGA or NIGGER. Well, then I'll be that. I will be that. Okay? And you deal with that. If that means you continue to put me in prison, then that's what you do. But I am going to be who I am. In fact, they've always seen us as criminals. In order to read and write was a criminal act. So why are we so caught up on what our image is in America? We've always, our fugitiveness was seen as criminal. The ideal of owning ourselves was criminal. So what? So now I'll be that. If that's what you think I am, let me be that.
But
That's just my
Well,
position.
well.
so
I mean, there's a consequence to that.
That's
There's a
right.
consequence.
That's right.
You'll be
We
what,
got 2
though?
million.
Yeah,
I'll
mean,
be
but
that.
you're
I'll be
saying
that.
you know, that we just
NIGGA
go
or
to
whatever.
that
I mean,
incarceration.
but that incarceration has
Unemployment.
it exists. It exists right now. It
Right.
exists. And so, yes, and we have to deal with that. We definitely have to deal with that. But to constantly have to have this conversation of respectability, of do I call myself an N-word or have someone else call me an N-word, that should be null and void at this point. Because we are in a crisis mode. And so you say I'm that, I'll be that. In fact, I've always been that according to you. My blackness has always been a criminal act or something that is wrong. So I'm done debating that issue, and we got to go deal with something else. about the issues of unemployment, about the issues of mass incarceration, about our men and women being killed in the street. I'm not talking about this no more. It's done.
Preach on, preacher.
That's all right.
Okay. And again, my feelings on this is perhaps, again, we'll just
Sure,
agree to
yes, of
disagree
course.
on that issue. Because I think, I see those things as tied together. Because one of the things that Darren Wilson said, for example, is that he saw Mike Brown as having some hawk-like strength.
Right, and in San Francisco, you had a police officer say, it's okay to kill an animal, as if, in talking about the context of killing black men on the street. So yes, I mean.
So, and likewise, I see, who's hiring, who's doing the hiring, who's doing the promoting.
And this is why I scream until I am blue in the face at my people who are just becoming entrepreneur. Then this question of who's hiring. Who's hiring? The black man down the street who has the store on the corner is hiring. The black woman who has the hair shop is hiring. The black man who owns the restaurant is hiring.
Right.
I mean, truth is, you tend to hire people who look like you. Not saying that you wouldn't step out of that, but you tend to hire people who look like you.
I agree, but I think what Dr. Spiller was saying is we have to get to that point. And something that's not up for debate is who is hiring and who has the power.
But I just can't grasp why, and I'm not saying that you don't work a job until, you get on your feet. I don't understand being at a job for 20, 30 years. I don't understand that.
Right.
I don't understand
But you also,
how come we don't have that drive or ambition, or I won't say we don't, because I've met a lot of, young, ambitious black men and women who are, on the grind trying to make stuff happen. So I won't say that we don't. I don't feel like enough of us have that drive and ambition to plan for something else outside of the same monotonous thing every day. Like, how come we aren't starting businesses, thinking about our brothers and sisters, how we're going to put each other on, how we're going to dig ourselves out of this mess? We are constantly debating about how are we going to make this society accept us.
Right, but and just to kind of finish up my point, like, there are black people that are out there hiring other black people. There are black people out there networking with and helping other black people. Dr. Spiller helped me get my current job, where I work right now and provide for my family. That's a black person helping a black person.
Okay.
But once again, you can't discount the historical, you can't discount the history. As Jamila said, we were brought over here, black people were brought over here as chattel property, as animals, bound, gagged, raped, killed, pillaged, just totally emasculated. Every diabolical thing you can think of, that's what happened. And just to fast forward, 50 years ago, we didn't really have any rights. We couldn't get legitimate mortgages. We couldn't own homes. We couldn't do anything. So that's why I say there has been progress. It was legal to keep us from owning homes. So if we're just now getting in the race, you can't expect for us for everyone to be so industrious and entrepreneurial and have that same spirit when we were just coming out of survival mode. Literally coming out of survival mode. So now, yeah, those are things that can be taught to the next generation, and hopefully people can hire, but you have to play the game and get in those positions of power. And if you go to the corporations, dominated by white men. If you go to Hollywood, dominated by white men. If you go to politics, dominated by white men. Education, higher education, academia, dominated mostly by white men, right? So, you have to get in those positions. And we can debate using the N-word, we can debate what we call ourselves, we can debate those things all day, but you have other people such as Jewish people. When they were in survival mode, they changed their last names, they hid under houses, they did all these things that they were doing just to survive, and they played the game. Now, Jewish people run businesses, they run the Fed, you know, we got to kind of play the game. Like, I'm all for having pride and you know, embracing my blackness, but there's also a game to be played so I can get in a position to fully do that.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Speak Up. We invite you to tune in next week, same time, Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. And it will be a continuation of the conversation that we are currently having today. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Oh Lord, please don't let me be on this earth.